Alright guys, today we're taking a look at Blades of Fire, a brand new action-adventure game that just got out and features some very interesting mechanics I think really sets it apart. Mainly its directional attacks letting you target individual enemy body parts and the crafting system where you physically control how weapons get crafted. The game world looks vibrant as well and filled with unique encounters, which is why today I really wanted to check it out with you guys. Also, quick disclaimer, the team did reach out to sponsor today's video, so big thanks to Blades of Fire and 505 Games for the opportunity. Definitely also check the game out using the links down below. But on that note, let's get started with the combat, which I think is really the highlight over here. It's surprisingly impactful and there's a lot of weight to it. Pretty much every weapon you use, of which there are many of in this game by the way, will have a different feeling, a different weight, different levels of stamina, speed, and pretty much will feel very distinct from one another. And some of them have, of course, strengths and weaknesses. Now, one thing that's very important to note about this game is its directional attack input. Pretty much you can attack enemies from all angles, left, right, above, or below. And this is going to drastically affect how successful you are, especially against bigger and tougher challenges, because every type of attack may or may not bypass an enemy's armor, which you can see by the highlight color going from green, yellow to red, where green pretty much means you're bypassing all the armor, penetrating it, and dealing the full amount of damage. So this is important to note because many times you're going to notice that only the head, the feet, or one of the arms can be attacked, but if you do that, you can deal the maximum amount of damage, which oftentimes results in some very satisfying and crunchy hits. Another mechanic that similarly comes into play is your ability to change stances. Many of the weapons, especially great swords, can have at least a couple of stances. One in which you can perform slashes and another one in which you can perform pokes. So as you can see, in the case of some of these enemies, either one or the other can be much better suited for the type of enemy that is, especially if you're fighting something that has a lot of armor by default. Instead of performing slashes, pokes may be better, maybe even keeping you at a distance and leveraging that distance so that you can reach them before they reach you. Another aspect here to note is that each enemy has different weaknesses, so it's a good idea to have different weapons so you can try out different stances or different setups against them. Now, one thing to note is that if you die while you're holding one of these weapons, you're going to drop that weapon, which is one of the unique mechanics over here. You don't drop any other resources, just your weapon. But the good news is that you can always retrieve it by going in the same place where you dropped it, be it from an enemy defeating you or if you, for example, just fell to your death. In addition to this, your parry actually fits a double role over here. One is that it's the primary way to replenish your stamina really quickly, and this is going to be dependent on the weapon, but you don't want to be left with low stamina, otherwise risk having very slow attack movement. And second of all, if you perform perfect parries by connecting at the right moment, you can even stagger the enemy and get about 8 or so seconds of no stamina decay, which helps a ton if you want to overwhelm the enemy with a ton of attacks really quickly. Which brings us to the next most important feature, which is weapon crafting. And the forging minigame in here pretty much lets you physically control how you craft your weapon. So first things first, you can go to this place from any anvil and picking the option to visit the forge. And once you're here, you can pick a schematic to craft. In this case, you're going to unlock more weapon schematics by defeating a certain number of enemies. You can even see over here that some of them have been partially unlocked. So you actually have to defeat a certain number of those enemies before you unlock the weapons that they actually hold. From this point on, you then have to pick its components. Pretty much every weapon has different handles, blades, and other components which influence stats such as the damage, speed, stamina, and even weight. So this is something you have to take into account depending on your playstyle. Even within the component categories, you also get to choose the option of materials, which will further influence those stats higher or lower. So obviously, higher tier materials means that you're overall going to get better stats. Once all of this is selected, you're ready to forge the actual weapon. And in this case, your main priority is to shape it following exactly the white outline. The closer you are to matching the iron with that white outline, the higher the star rating is going to be. And the game even offers 3 buttons to adjust the angle, the power, as well as the location where you get to hit the iron so that you actually get as close as possible. In this case, like I said, you're going to want to aim for high star ratings. Why is that the case? Pretty simple. It's because the more star rating you have, the more repairs you can have for that weapon. Stats don't get affected, it's just that you can use that weapon for much longer. But a really cool quality of life change over here is that once you have crafted a high star rating weapon of a type, you can actually just quick craft it in the future without having to repeat the same process again, unless you want a higher star rating for it if you want more attempts. So this is something that you can choose before actually forging the weapon, as you've likely seen in the screen before. Also important to note for exploration is that you're going to find a lot of these statues with weapons in their hands, and if you present a weapon that you crafted of the same type, you're always going to get an additional weapon part or component unlocked for that weapon, which means you can now craft much better versions of that weapon if you go back at the forge. Very useful as you progress in the game and progressively need better gear. Which brings us to the third point I wanted to make, and that is that exploration is actually massive in this game. You have a lot of maps that are intertwined with many secret areas, adjacent routes, and all sorts of locations that are worth exploring. Pretty much every inch of the maps over here is filled to the brim with something that is useful to you. If it's not enemies that you defeat to drop a lot of resources that you can funnel in better and better gear, it's just enemies you can defeat for their highly sought after weapon schematics. Then we also have all of the treasures waiting for you and other secret encounters. So obviously treasures are going to be very important over here. You can find both stamina as well as health gems from them, and when you get 4 of them, you're going to progressively increase both of your stamina and HP bar. Beyond this, you also get to find something called scrolls, which essentially function kind of like the game's passive skill systems. So in this case, you're going to have a very neat companion over here, this guy right here, and as you find these scrolls, he can decipher them for you. And what these essentially do, they give you extra points in this screen over here called the Celestial Step. And what you can do is essentially increase how much HP you regenerate, how many flasks you can have, more than 3 of course, all the way to increasing the number of stars you can get a weapon to via forging. So this means more survivability as well as more weapon usage before breaking. Now another important aspect over here is that oftentimes you're going to find some of these enemies that appear made out of stone initially, and if you hit them, you're going to hear your character exclaim that you need to find a special iridescent crow nearby. And usually that is the case as well. It's usually very close by, no more than a few feet away. If you keep an eye out for them, you should find them both by the sound as well as by their visual appeal, like for example this one. And once you find it, you can then track it back all the way to the initial statue. Upon hitting it, the crow is actually going to reveal the enemy, which is typically going to be one of these very annoying but very powerful knights that you have to be careful about. But like you can see over here, they can be another very good source of items you normally find in secret treasures. For example, this one right here gave me a stamina gem by defeating it, but others can give you similar resources that go into other features that can unlock very special powers. And while we're on that note, if at any point you find yourself lost or don't know how to progress to the next objective, the first thing you should do is just use the magnifying glass feature, which is basically how you're going to get hints where you need to progress next. This is going to be number 5 on keyboard and mouse, or up on the D-pad if you're using a controller. But other times you're going to get environmental cues by interacting with special items or other features in the environment. You can, for example, get hints for a number of seconds that appear on the map so that you know exactly where you need to go. Constantly consult these as they will bring you to the right location. Now, there are a couple more features that I want to quickly go over, and one of them is weapon reputation. As you use weapons to defeat enemies, the more enemies you defeat with that weapon, the more its reputation will increase. Like, for example, you can see that some of my weapons over here are pretty much at outstanding level. So what I can do with this is, instead of recycling the weapon to only get a portion of the materials back right before it breaks, I can instead go ahead and talk to this NPC called Glinda that I've unlocked very early on in the story to instead exchange this notorious weapon for some materials of my choice. So when I go here, you can see that I can get a lot more materials than the usual, and typically it's crafting mats of higher quality that I can then funnel into better and better weapons. So try to do this instead of constantly recycling, as this can be very beneficial later on. Also, another thing to note is that your trusty companion Atso is actually very useful for a couple of things. Primarily, he's a very keen observant. So what this means is, as you're fighting more and more with enemies, he's going to write about their weaknesses in his chronicles. You can find right here in the main menu. And what this means is you can pretty much check enemy weaknesses and how you can take them down more easily. He's even observant about some of their key mechanics, such as ones that you can, for example, interrupt, which ones to dodge, or which ones you can use to counterattack. And in this case, you're going to have a much better time against them. Just to give you an example, some of the tougher enemies here, like the trolls, for example, are much harder to defeat than your typical mob because they have a lot of HP regen and can even petrify themselves to avoid melee damage. However, if you pay attention to the notes over here from Atso, you can see that right before beginning petrification, these trolls get stunned and vulnerable, but only for a few seconds. So during this time, you have to immediately follow up with an attack which is going to mutilate them, either slashing huge amounts of HP from their HP bar or even body parts, like the head over here, which this enemy obviously is more than capable of fighting without. So definitely something to pay attention to. As you progress, obviously more information will be unlocked over here, but it's always worth checking this out no matter what. Anyway, that is pretty much it with the video. Again, totally check the game out using the links down below. Blades of Fire has been out since the 22nd of May. And of course, I'm gonna give a huge shout out to 505 Games and Blades of Fire team for sponsoring today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.